Elin Nordegren's story has become one of those rare celebrity narratives that actually gets more interesting the further it moves from the headlines that made her famous. Most people still associate her with a single image: the wrecked SUV outside a Florida mansion on a cold November night in 2009, the broken glass, and the abrupt, humiliating unraveling of what had looked like a fairy tale marriage to the most dominant golfer of his generation. For years afterward, she was defined almost entirely through that lens: the wronged wife, the tabloid fixture, the woman standing in Tiger Woods' shadow. Looking at where she is now, in 2026, that framing feels almost laughably outdated. She didn't disappear so much as quietly opt out of the entire apparatus that made her famous in the first place, and what she built instead looks nothing like the usual celebrity reinvention playbook. There was no reality show, no memoir, no tell-all sit-down with a major interviewer cashing in on decades-old scandal, even though plenty of people expected exactly that. Instead, she went back to school. At a South Florida youth sports complex today, she's just another parent in a linen blazer holding a cooling cup of coffee, herding a cluster of kids toward a field. That ordinariness is, in its own way, the most radical thing about her. She spent the better part of a decade using her divorce settlement not for a spending spree or a string of high-profile romances, but to fund a genuine academic pursuit: a degree in psychology from Rollins College, followed by professional licensure. She now runs her own therapy practice, working with clients on the same kinds of trauma and upheaval she once lived through in public. There's an obvious irony in that arc. A woman whose private pain was picked apart by tabloids for years now spends her working life helping other people process theirs, but also reads as a deliberate, almost defiant choice. Rather than let the scandal define her forever, she became a professional expert in the very psychological terrain that scandal put her through. Her family life today looks nothing like the tabloid-era version either. She and her partner, former NFL tight end Jordan Cameron, together have 3 young children, and combined with Cameron's son from an earlier relationship and Ellen's 2 children with Tiger, she's managing a household of 6 kids. It's a chaotic, logistics-heavy existence. School runs, sports practices, homework, the ordinary churn of raising a big blended family. A far cry from private jets and paparazzi dodging. Maybe the most surprising development, though, is the current state of her relationship with Tiger Woods himself. What was once one of the most bitter, expensive, and thoroughly publicized divorces in sports history has evidently settled into something closer to genuine partnership. The two are regularly seen supporting their children together at milestone events, standing side by side without the visible tension people once assumed would define their interactions forever. It's a version of co-parenting that looks less like a truce and more like real friendship, which is its own kind of quiet vindication for a story that once seemed destined to end in permanent hostility. To understand how unlikely all of this once seemed, it helps to go back to where Ellen actually started, not as a golf wife, but as a college-age Swedish nanny with no interest in fame at all. She grew up in Stockholm, working ordinary summer jobs alongside her twin sister to help pay for school, steeped in a culture that valued privacy and modesty over spectacle. The job that changed her life wasn't glamorous. She took a position as a nanny for the family of golfer Jesper Parnevik, a job she took to fund her studies, not to meet anyone famous. It was through that connection that she crossed paths with Tiger Woods, who at the time occupied a kind of cultural stratosphere reserved for only the biggest global sports stars. According to accounts from that period, she wasn't particularly starstruck and initially turned him down. She was focused on her own studies in child psychology and had little interest in the celebrity circus that followed him everywhere. Eventually, his persistence won her over, and what followed was a relationship between 2 very different worlds: his loud, hyper-commercialized American superstardom and her reserved, low-key Scandinavian sensibility. As their relationship became public through the early 2000s, Ellen settled into a role that made her something of an anomaly in the golf world, a fixture at tournaments who never gave interviews, never sought a media platform of her own, and generally stayed out of the spotlight as much as someone married to Tiger Woods possibly could. Friends from that period reportedly describe her as fiercely protective of the couple's privacy, someone who helped construct a wall between their public image and private life. That same protective instinct, ironically, may have helped shield the very secrets that would eventually bring the marriage down. Throughout this era, she was widely seen as decorative, a beautiful quiet presence beside a dominant athlete. But by most accounts, she was also quietly observant, absorbing lessons about pressure, image management, and the psychology of high-stakes environments that would later feed directly into her academic and professional path. Their wedding in October 2004, held at the Sandy Lane Resort in Barbados, was an enormous, tightly controlled production. Reports describe Woods renting out the entire resort complex for over a week, chartering local helicopters, and even leasing the island's boat services in an effort to keep paparazzi away by land, air, or sea. The ceremony itself took place under an elaborate floral canopy, with thousands of imported roses, and a guest list that reportedly included figures like Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and Oprah Winfrey. Elin, 24 at the time, was a picture of understated elegance against a dramatic Caribbean sunset. The couple spent their wedding night aboard a rented luxury yacht literally named Privacy, a detail that, in hindsight, reads as almost too on the nose. The wedding was designed as the ultimate assertion of protected, insulated happiness. Nobody watching the fireworks that night could have guessed how thoroughly that same wall of privacy would later come to conceal, rather than protect, the marriage. The years that followed settled into a routine that looked, from the outside, like uncomplicated success. The couple lived in Windermere, Florida, welcomed their daughter Sam in 2007, and later their son Charlie in early 2009. Elin threw herself into motherhood, largely avoiding the socialite lifestyle in favor of a quieter, more domestic existence. But beneath that calm surface, cracks were forming. Tiger's career demanded constant travel and relentless public performance, and the pressures of maintaining that image were, unbeknownst to most, coexisting with a much messier private reality. Elin, increasingly isolated within a tightly managed circle of handlers and image-conscious staff, was, by many later accounts, navigating a growing unease that she couldn't fully name at the time, even as the world continued to see the two of them as an untouchable golden couple. That illusion collapsed almost overnight on Thanksgiving night in 2009. In the early hours of November 27th, a black SUV rolled out of the couple's driveway, struck a fire hydrant, and crashed into a neighbor's tree. Police arriving at the scene found Tiger, Woods lying in the street, semi-conscious, with Elin standing over him holding a golf club. The first version of events framed her as a hero, smashing a rear window to pull her husband from the wreckage after hearing the crash. Within days, though, that narrative began to unravel under obvious questions. Why was he leaving the house at 2:30 in the morning? Why did he hit a hydrant so close to his own driveway? And why would rescuing someone from a low-speed accident require breaking a window at all? The timing lined up with a tabloid report alleging an affair, and speculation grew that Elin had discovered evidence of infidelity and confronted him just before the crash. Within weeks, a parade of other women came forward publicly, and what had been carefully protected privacy dissolved completely, turning the marriage's collapse into one of the most exhaustively covered scandals in modern sports history. What's striking is how Elin responded to that firestorm. Rather than granting interviews, selling photos, or engaging publicly at all, she retreated into the same reserved silence that had always defined her. Except this time, it wasn't in service of protecting Tiger's image. It was self-protection, a deliberate choice to withdraw from a media circus rather than participate in it. She eventually settled with Woods for a reported $100 million, but rather than treating that money as a lifestyle upgrade, she used it to fund something closer to a total personal reinvention, a college education, a licensed career, and a home life built around genuine day-to-day parenting rather than public appearances. She reportedly even tore down and rebuilt her Florida home from the ground up, a literal and symbolic gesture that mirrors the way she rebuilt her identity more broadly. What makes her current chapter compelling isn't a dramatic makeover or a splashy public reappearance. It's the opposite. She built an ordinary, functional, occasionally chaotic life centered on 6 kids, a stable long-term relationship, and meaningful work helping other people process the kind of upheaval she once lived through in the most public possible way. The label that once followed her everywhere, Tiger's ex, has faded not because enough time has passed, but because she methodically built an identity substantial enough to replace it. She isn't waiting to be defined by a decades-old scandal. She's simply living a full, occupied, private life that happens to include a genuinely amicable relationship with her ex-husband as they raise their children together. It's a much quieter ending than tabloids in 2009 would have predicted, And that quietness is precisely the point.